Everybody today for Between the Covers. My name is Bradley Shaw, and today we're speaking to Jodie Miller, the author of What Does It Feel Like Being Born? A memoir of maternity activism. Thank you, Jodie, for joining us today. You look lovely.
Oh, thanks, Bradley.
You're most welcome. Please do tell us and the viewers, what is that wonderful book about for you?
Well, for me, it's the story of making my family, but on a wider platform, it's also the story of Queensland birth reform, which goes on in the story, went on in history, to actually create some federal changes to Medicare for midwives.
Very good, very good. So you deal on the topical issue of the politics or the family? What is the aspect of the book you really feel?
It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of, it's not terribly political. It's more anecdotal. Yeah. I was in a really privileged position to be a sidekick to some movers and shakers in maternity reform in Queensland. I was not really a central character, but I think that put me in a good position to be a storyteller. Yeah. And at the same time, I had a lot of my own personal dramas going on. So there is quite a substantial family story and personal story that goes along with it.
Yeah, and that's fantastic for you to be, so open and brave with that particular elements of the story. I mean, taking a second seat and watching the politics in the world operating is fine, but when you're actually going to put your personal preference, like you're sharing such personal information, I mean, that's a very brave.
I feel a little bit exposed, and so does my mother, I must confess. It took me a little bit of time to win her over and have her agree to allow herself to be in the book. But really, it's a universal story of becoming a mother and evolving as a woman. Yeah. And I think that by the end, all characters will be forgiven for their misdemeanors.
So this is a tactile word. So the family unit that you have, of course, they were supportive of this book. Like you say, your mother was a bit hesitant, wasn't sure.
Well, my mother didn't know she was even in it for the longest time. Yeah. I did spring that on her. I had a special copy of the book printed just for her prior to publication so that she could read it like a book. When I got it back, she had scratched out every entry that she was mentioned in.
Wow, okay.
Bless her. It was hard for her, I think the great thing about that, though, is we've come through the other side and it's been quite healing. Sorry, I forgot what the initial part of the question was, Brad.
Just the family in general, the whole family.
No, my kids,
your husband and your father, everyone else involved.
My husband has always been amazingly supportive of the whole expedition. So I'm really, really blessed for that. And I hope he doesn't feel too exposed either, but I think he looks pretty good in the end.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful depiction of, as you say, the authenticity and the reality of the situation. You haven't embellished a lot of, that sometimes these books can do. They get wrapped up in the cause of the book and they can embellish a lot of experiences and a lot of things to make, bigger out of smaller. But you've done such a wonderful job modestly keeping the reality of the story true, I think.
Well, parenthood is hard.
It is.
Having babies is hard, and I wasn't going to idealize that.
No.
So there were a lot of conflicts and struggles in the process of trying to be fulfilled myself and look after my little family as well and make sure I wasn't exploiting them. So there was definitely a bit of a tightrope walk there in the middle, and I can't say I excelled at all of it.
No, it is hard. It's a balancing act, especially when you say it's a personal story. So with that in mind, thinking of the family unit, just out of curiosity, the future family, do you think the children will be proud of you, be proud of the story, and understand what brought them into the place as well?
I hope so. My 19-year-old daughter picked up a book off the shelf yesterday and started reading it.
Yeah.
So my kids have not really read it beyond paper scratchings from the the waste paper drawer. All of the times I printed it out and took it to my amazing writing group for feedback. So they probably read excerpts here and there.
Yeah.
They did wonder why they were in it. But of course, I have protected their privacy and changed their names.
Of course. That's respectful address. But again, I was just curious of their feedback and their perception of that in the future as well for them. So it's wonderful from your personal experience with them as children and mother. So
it is a universal story too. So I haven't given away anything that might make them feel too exposed. There's a couple of chaotic family scenes in there. I think any parent or kids, they'll relate to that. It's nothing extraordinary.
But again, it goes back to the reality of the story, which I love. So in that sense too, like when you said there before you had a writing group and you would take it and share it, did you find that experience was able to help you write it better and get that honest feedback of it as it progressed, or was it something you didn't share entirely, you just sort of used?
No, I am all out there. Nothing's really secret. So pretty much from the first day we all met, they knew I was writing a memoir of birth.
Yep.
And the reform parts of it actually interested them less. They were more interested in my story. So my midwifery colleagues, I'm not a midwife, by the way. I was a consumer representative, but my midwife colleagues all wanted the historical story of birth reform, which is what I set out to write. But every time I took along personal elements of story, my writing group kept saying, no, we want more of this. So it's thanks to them that there is so much of me and my family in what could otherwise be perceived as a bit of a dry story of political lobbying and staging demonstrations, which is not really a huge part of the book. But for those people who are interested in the maternity politics side of things, there might be also a few tips and tricks along the way that they can exploit for their own purposes.
Now, as you say too, which I like, you said you're not a midwife, you're not an activist by nature. Why did you write this book? Like, why did you feel you were the one who could tell and share and create this beautiful story?
I was urging everybody else to write it. At the time that we were doing it, I'm like, this is a juicy story. Someone needs to write this story. Around 2003 or 2004, it was Bridget Jones's Diary. The movie had hit the theaters and everybody was talking about it and laughing about it. And we felt a bit underrated in the scheme of things, that here we are with a real story that's actually quite juicy and has lots of humor and has lots of drama. And how do we get people to tell it? Because generally speaking, maternity matters are not very sexy to the wider population. So how do we make it appealing in a uplit, chick lit kind of romantic way? So that's what I set out to try and create.
That's a perspective of the book, chick lit. Fair enough. No, it is. It's good. It's and you've done that well, as I say. That part of the humanness of the experiences and the politics involved in crossing that references. So how long did that take in research then? From that point, you're involved in it as a witness to some of the situations, but there were elements you would have had to expand and understand further, not being the midwife itself, like to look at that craft.
Well, aside from the actual real life research of doing the things.
Doing the involvement things, was there any research you had to expand and had to understand?
Oh, heaps.
Yeah. How did you find that process for you?
It was kind of fun, actually. I joined the Queensland Archives and I conducted about 25, maybe almost 30 interviews with people who were there or people who had experiences that I could learn from to write the book. There were also a lot of things I was not truly 100% cognizant of at the time that it was transpiring, like the whole Jayant Patel Dr. Death situation in Bundaberg, which did derail our project at the time. And I can't say I really understood the full scope of that drama as it was unfolding, because I had all my own dramas unfolding at the time.
Of course. Of course, yeah. No, and that's right, and that's the referencing in the book is how you've managed to balance those facts and your stories as well as you're part of it.
Tried not to make it too heavy and detail oriented.
No, I think there was enough of that through the history of it already. So I think you've taken a perspective which was good. So do you set out, when you were setting the book out, you're obviously, because what do you do when you're not writing? You're running your own business, I believe, is it? Or
yeah, I run a grocery home delivery business. So earlier this year, I'm really lucky, I finished the book in November, December last year.
Yep.
Of course, I didn't anticipate that 2020 was going to be the International Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. So that brought my timeline forward pretty quickly, which is how I reached out to you, Bradley. But then, you know, for a good 3 months there, life got rather crazy in business, and I wasn't able to prioritize the book at all. So I'm really glad that you were able to keep things churning in the background for me.
So the thing is that the timeline for that writing the book, the incubus came about in the early 2000s, you said, and it's developed for 15 years, or was it something you actually just sat down in a shorter term and just sort of said, right, you know, I really got this bug, I want to tell this story, I think I've got it the way I want it, this is how I'm going to, and you just started writing. How did you set up that plan of writing the book?
I started out when my kids were little. I had a very humble parenting blog. Mm-hmm. So some elements were drawn from that. But it probably wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago that I realized I was sitting on something a bit bigger than I thought I could handle. Mm-hmm. A few years later, I started a dedicated Facebook group called Recreating Maternity Reform or something like that. Yeah. Recreating the story of maternity reform, and added in everybody I knew from that time. And fortunately, their records and their memories were better than mine. So with their assistance, the whole story came together.
Well done. Good. Okay. So when did you realize you wanted to write it? You were running around thinking people should write it, but then you sat up and said, you know what? Damn it, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to take responsibility. When did that penny drop? When did that, I guess, epiphany go, you know, bang?
It would have had to have been August 8th, 2008, the 8th of the 8th of the 8th.
Can you be a little more specific?
We formed our writing group. We all met at a editing workshop at the Queensland Writers Centre.
Yep.
And we were all at about the same stage in our first manuscripts.
Yep.
And we felt like we were all on the same learning journey. And since then, actually, one of the members has been published twice and self-published once. So watching her do it all before me was hugely educational.
Yep.
And the other member of the group is an expert editor. So as unwieldy as my manuscript became, she was the one who said, Jodie, nope, Jodie, nope, Jodie, nope. And with a big red pen, took out chunks of my manuscript, including an entire chapter, which I might save as a little bit of a sweetener for any followers of my newsletter. They can see the missing chapter.
I was going to say, that's why one of my questions was, what did you take out of the book? I mean, obviously there's so much in it, and you had to weigh it up. Like, you would have written it in a bigger, I believe, a bigger scope, and it must have been so hard to sit back and go, okay, so many issues in this book are so important, but I have to, you know. So that's the interesting question. What elements do you feel did you take away from the book? Can you give us a sneak peek of some of the, you know, preferences that you made?
Look, I had to take out some of the family stories because I think readers will have their own family stories, and they probably don't need to read the nitty-gritty details of mine.
Yeah.
But the initial manuscript was also full of names. I wanted everybody to feel mentioned and everybody to feel thanked. And in the end, it just wasn't possible to name every single person who had a role in that journey. Yeah. So I had to conflate a few personalities, and you know, I had an entire committee that I had to reduce to 2 personalities. It was quite difficult, and I feel like I haven't really, even now when I show the manuscript, the book, it's a book, to my friends. But from that time, I'm apologising to them to go, sorry, I just I had to narrow it all down. Not everything's in there, and they understand, of course. They understand what it has to be.
Of course. Because I think they're just honoured that you even acknowledge their part in it without having it acknowledged, so to speak.
Yeah, well, the acknowledgements only goes for, a page. I could have gone for pages and pages. I wanted to, but
Well, that's why they only give you 2 minutes at the Oscars to give you the award. Can you imagine how many people they have to thank? It is hard. It is hard to thank everyone. I mean, really, and it takes practice, and that is prioritizing. So with that in mind, what was the biggest challenge in writing the actual book? So that's a taking away of and the removing, but what was the biggest challenge in actually putting the construct of it together for you?
The biggest challenge was my own fear that I was writing about I was writing about people's grief. I was writing about people's embarrassment. Some of the stories are going to open old wounds, and that was always a struggle. Do I include it or do I gloss over it? And in the end, I felt it would be an injustice to all the readers if I glossed. So there is an apology in the back of the book as well, that there are several people whose tragedies I had to reference, and I still struggle with that, and I know there may be people who will disagree with how I've treated those situations, but I had to tell my truth, and excluding those stories would not have been my whole truth.
And that's the most important part of a memoir, and that's the challenge of it. You're going to find critics anywhere you go for any reason they choose, but yes, you have to stand by what you.
I'm preparing for it.
I know.
Birth is a polarizing topic. Reproductive rights are a polarizing topic, and I know there will be people who won't like some of the treatments of the stories in the book, and it will be confronting for people who haven't had the opportunity to think deeply about what's happened to them, or people who feel like they've been wronged, people who've experienced trauma. The book should come with a trigger warning for some, but I had a lot of sensitivity readers through that process, because I was very, very mindful of the fact that I didn't want anyone to throw the book across the room. And I wanted them to get to the end and understand what the bigger message was meant to be.
No, well done. So with that in mind too, like you do take that brave step, as you say, but you've been conscious of the steps. You haven't just been blasely, rushing out there and telling this story and indulging it. You've been very conscious of that. So in essence, to your own self-control and your own perception, who in your life or who do you consider as someone brings out your best of yourself? Because you've had to question yourself through this process, but who have you found was that person that brought out that best of you?
Quite a lot of people actually, but I think number one gold medal goes to my husband for keeping the faith. Because living with me during that writing process.
Is he in the room? Is he in the room? Because
no.
That's a bit of a.
He just crawled behind here so that he could go to work.
There you go. The hubby's the golden ticket winner.
Yes, he is.
I'm glad you said that.
He's all right in my books.
Yeah, because I'm glad you said that, because us men don't get enough credit.
No, definitely. I think couldn't have finished it without that kind of support. And even today, he helped me set up the Zoom and make sure the light was right and reminded me to put up the banner. So I don't waste a single opportunity, because, when you've spent 15 years on a book, you want to give it its best shot in the world.
And you deserve it. So don't worry, don't feel bad. And I'm glad he cares enough. He cares enough to help you make sure you get that accolade, because
thank you.
Great work. So what is in the future for Jodie? What are you looking at? Is this an inspiration for you now? Is this a motivation, or is this something you've closed and you're happy with?
I still love to write.
Yeah.
I might pour a little more energy into my blog, which is a bit neglected at the moment. I have started another book. I don't know where it will fit in the scheme of books I write just yet, because it will depend on how this book is received and whether maybe there's maybe there's a workbook or some other non-fiction book to follow this one if there's a demand for it.
Yeah.
I don't really know. But the story that I have started is actually the prequel to this story, my husband and my time in Japan. Probably the story of his career more than mine. Again, I'm the sidekick. But I was in a position at least to witness some amazing technological innovation in a place, and maybe after coronavirus isolation, people might enjoy a story that's set abroad and a bit of a travel memoir and a true romance.
Get a bit more perspective of things too. Sometimes maybe the world's bigger than just your lounge room at the moment.
Yeah, we'll see how it all fits together.
But that's great. It's good to know there's more stuff happening for you, because that's important. And we like every accomplishment, every milestone in your life, has to move you forward. And I think this book.
My kids are curious. They want to know. Yeah. My daughter's actually going through a thing this year. It's been really tough for her, and she said, "Oh well, it'll all be great fodder for the book you write about me."
She's in chapter such and such already. Yeah, she's already set up. So,
darling, we'll co-write it. Don't worry.
So did you find in this cycle, like writing a memoir for most people is difficult? I mean, you've picked a block of your life in that period, but do you find that you needed to understand also yourself a lot more in different periods of your life to actually come to this period you wrote about as much? So what I'm asking is, what did you find hard in the book process, in the writing process for you personally, as you said, writing the story?
I feel like I've gone through psychotherapy. There's definitely, my husband's in technology, defrag is the word that comes to mind. It's like a pulling apart and then a putting back together of my psyche. And it's a healthy thing. I actually feel more whole now that I've written that story than I did before, because there was a lot that I didn't really have a place for in my brain that now belongs and is integrated, if that makes sense. So I highly endorse the process of writing your own memoir, whether you have an ambition to publish it or not. I think we all have a story worth passing on to the next generation. And if you don't write it or document it somehow, even if it's a photo album, so long as you include the dates and the names of the people in the pictures, don't let those details be lost, because otherwise history repeats and we don't learn from what has already been. Absolutely.
So on that note, with the defragging and the reconstructing and the putting together, the spirit and the soul, the heart, the mind, all the elements you had to put into this book, do you feel you're a different person from when it started to when now?
Oh, I think you're always a different person every year that goes on,
Of course.
Our whole body is renewed every 5 to 8 years or something. Isn't that how the story goes? So
I hope so, because I could use a new one. How much time have you got left on this one?
Yes, my liver will be a new liver in 5 years.
I'll take whatever's going.
So definitely, we're never the same.
Yeah, but so from that point I meant, it's you've seen yourself in the world differently because you've achieved a milestone of something that you're proud of, that that you've invested into yourself. And what has that done for you in your own growth? Have you noticed any of that change in yourself?
I never got to have a career.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of women probably feel that way because life, having children interrupts your ambitions, and then they shift, and then it's not until your children grow that you get a chance to return to whatever those ambitions were, if they're the same thing.
So are you friends with a lot of authors now? You've said you're part of your writing group. Have you found that your contribution to them as authors has changed, has been you're now able to understand, whereas you said earlier you went to the group and you hadn't had really understanding fully what was involved, what was happening, and you've watched and learned. Do you feel now more confident in that capacity to help more writers?
Yeah, I can't help myself, but that's how I got into advocacy and activism in the first place. I think it's my teacher temperament that I always want to facilitate other people.
Yep.
Yeah, but most of that, you know, in this day and age is an online entity, and I'm in quite a number of Facebook groups, and I must say Facebook is my social media home. I am on Instagram, and I am attempting to learn Twitter, but I am definitely not expert at that platform. It's tough.
Yeah.
So, and Facebook is where my old parenting forum friends are, where my midwife friends hang out. So that's pretty well where a lot of my marketing energy is being directed as well.
Well, it has a lot of personal approach to Facebook. It's more connected. I think, you know, there's that intimacy in Facebook that you've got, as you say, family friends on there, and more directly. You can see more involved, more engagement directly. So yeah, it's a great tool too for especially spreading your word and getting support. From that, I know the book only recently came out, but have you had a chance to gain some feedback from some readers, some pre-reviews or anything come back to you yet, or are you waiting on that?
Still waiting on them to trickle in, but I know at least one has been submitted to the Angus and Robertson book site.
Yes.
For a moment, briefly trended on Booktopia, so that was a nice feeling. Good. And for the people who've read it, particularly those who don't have children themselves, I'm quite fascinated that they still find the book compelling.
Yeah.
Even if they haven't had children. So that was unexpected.
Yeah.
That kind of feedback.
That's good. And I'm just trying to think of this question. It's an interesting question, actually. I will ask it. This is one thing that I just want you to think about. It will probably relate to you more so because of your process in the writing of the book you've explained. When did you realise that the words you can write, the words in the story you can create, would have a power, would have an effect on other people?
There were a couple of stories that I wrote that are in the book that people were quite speechless after I presented it to them. They'd say things like, wow, I never thought of it that way before, or wow, that was really visceral. The thing about writing about pregnancy and childbirth is it's a visceral experience. And a lot of my early readers were, they said, transported back to that moment, that they felt it. And I think that's the most flattering thing. And once people started saying that to me, I tried to figure out how to make all of that political stuff just as physical and visceral as the pregnancy and baby having stories. So there's definitely some characters in the book who are real people, but yes, they're characters.
Yes.
And I think it's through them that I'm able to really communicate the story, because I don't have to preach. I just have what these people did and said in all of these different circumstances to tell the story for me. It's much more fun that way. Absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned that you had to challenge yourself to lift the balancing act of your own, other story parts to match the parts you've already written. You've got feedback on quite powerfully. That's a good conscious exercise as a writer, to make sure you are keeping your own standards, because it's easy to see a good chapter and then suddenly the writer seems to get lazy, and then they're back to a good chapter and then they drop a chapter, and it's a pity to see a book like that sometimes happen to writers, but you've made that effort and conscious effort, and it shows in the book. So with that too, as you've gone through your own process, how would you describe for new upcoming writers, or what would you advise them on, I guess, avoiding the traps and the pitfalls of writing a book? Probably that Stephen King expression comes to mind. What is it? That you write with the door closed and you edit with the door open?
Yeah.
I have actually been approached by a few people who want to write memoirs and are feeling fearful, and I can relate to that feeling. So if you've been in a situation that you think writing about could get you into trouble, you got to write that story.
That's the one you got to write.
You've got to write that story. It's your duty, because how else do you change the world, really?
This is true. This is true. You've got to have the brave people. And I admire that. So with writing this book, you usually put so much personal energy and research and so much expose in it. Did you find writing it an exhausting process or an energizing process? You were balancing family, life, business, like you had a lot happening, as you said. What were the effects of it for you?
It's a roller coaster, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose you could very much use the metaphor of a pregnancy, because in those early, in the early stages, it's quite chaotic and you feel quite ill and you don't know where it's going and whether it's even going to transpire and become a book at all. And then in the middle, it feels really long and you still don't really know how it's going to end. But by the time you get to the very, very final stages, everything speeds up and sometimes feels a bit out of your control.
Yes.
And then suddenly you're holding a book.
There you are, and you're on social media in an interview talking about the book.
Yeah. Well, there was something I did.
What's that?
I motivated myself as soon as you sent me my
you got yourself a little
my cover.
Yeah.
I wrapped an aspirational memoir. Don't know if you can see that.
The year of magical what?
The year of magical thinking, Joan Didion. It's probably a world famous memoir.
Yeah.
I wrapped my book. Sorry, I wrapped this book in your cover and I put it on the shelf and I pretended I had a book because I had to get there to the end. I was starting to flag, we were in the middle of coronavirus and I just sort of needed that little push motivation to go, yes, I have a book, baby.
That's good. That's good. So in that sense, who is your favorite author or what is your favorite novel, if you can,
Oh dear.
Do you have
the last one I read, probably. I fall in love with each book while I'm in it and then set it aside and go, that was nice. What's next?
Yep. So you don't have a favorite author? It's always just what appeals to you at the times, or
it's what appeals to me at the time, but I still probably always have to come back to, and I've got to remember the author's name. I'll be looking down at the shelf to remember it. Angela's Ashes was the first memoir I ever read.
Yes.
That read like a novel, that drew me in and made me sad when it was over. So and the author's name has just escaped me, which is terrible because he did follow with another two.
Yes.
And his Irishness came through and it was really just an adorable, sad, uplifting, wonderful book.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of that. I mean, one of those in that I've read Angela's Ashes. I did like that. It was a beautiful book. I also like Mao's Last Dancer. I don't know if you've read that.
Yeah.
That was an amazing story of the Chinese dancer coming to Australia.
Yeah. I read Educated recently, Tara Westover. That was a really good one.
Yeah. So there's some wonderful
being made at the moment.
And I believe, in my humble opinion, that your book is in the kudos of all those that we've mentioned, because I think you've established the credibility and the authenticity of a book and a memoir that deserves, and I think readers will find, a real personal journey in it for themselves, as you said, but also sharing yours, but also see and understand more about history, politics, and our involvement in that issue. And I think that's a really strong book, which is important for our culture. So you've done an amazing job. So I'm very proud of you.
And it still goes on today, even this week. The Mackay Birth Centre is experiencing some conflict because one obstetrician has decided that the policy should change, is the impression that I've got, which is excluding somebody who's used the birth centre before from using the birth centre this time. And it's really not fair. It's not fair.
Wow, it's a sometimes a revolving door. So you think some days you'd sit back and watch politics and things and issues, and you don't understand why things don't seem to, mediate and grow forward. You sort of keep stopping and keep going. Why is it so hard for people? I don't understand.
They don't seem to want women to just decide for themselves, and we treat pregnancy like a pathology and not like the normal milestone in life that it is.
It's terrible sometimes. Yeah, you have such a strange social construct sometimes. So what would you say, on getting to the end of things, what would you say is your writer's quirk? Most, like you say, you wrapped your cover around
another book. What else would you do when you're writing? Some people have to have a certain coffee cup, they have to have a certain position, they have to have a certain window or facing a certain aspect. What is your writing quirk, would you say?
I write right here, and I don't write in cafes. I can't take my laptop anywhere. I write in this chair, at this desk, at this computer. But aside from that, you also know, because you did proofread my book, Bradley, that contractions, as in, you know, the grammatical phenomenon is not really my thing until the last minute.
That's right. The quirk of your shortened words is fun, but for an editing purpose. But look, the book is wonderful, and I thoroughly enjoyed working on it with you as well. And again, I hope everyone viewing and watching has enjoyed your input and honesty. Does buy the book. I hope you get a copy of the book. It is available everywhere that books are sold. And again, I recommend not just for women. It is a book, I think, for men to get perspectives as well. It's a very enlightening book to women's thoughts and psyche, and also process of the journey in pregnancy. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing it with us, taking the time with us today. Please, everybody, grab a copy of the book. That's all I can say, bottom line. Yeah, we look forward to more books, hopefully, from Jodie coming in the future, as she's hinted at, maybe, especially for her daughter's biography, by the look of it. But yeah, thank you, Jodie, for your time today.
Thank you so much, Bradley. It's a pleasure.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.